I'm Dr. Sunita, Kurpad, Professor of Psychiatry and Head of Medical Ethics here. Very happy to welcome all of you for this session today. May I first welcome Dr. Joris. Can you please, he's the chair for today's session. And let me just introduce you to him. He is Dr. Joris Gielen, Director and Associate Professor, Center for Global Health Ethics, Duquesne University. I'm not sure about the pronunciation right. Yeah, in Pittsburgh, USA. Very happy to welcome you here today, and we're really fortunate to have your expertise with us today. Please join us. Very happy to welcome Monsignor Renzo. Thank you for being with us today. And do you want to start with some opening remarks, and then we'll go on to
so about procedures.
Yes, so what we planned, we have 4 speakers, so the request is that each speaker keeps to time 15 minutes, and as Dr. Joris has suggested, I think it's a good idea, we'll have the questions for each speaker for 5 minutes after the session, so that everyone gets time. Dr. Ercan Avci will have a session online, so I think he's been online since 1, and I think we were supposed to start at 2. So once we have the session, he'll also take questions. We will request all the people who ask questions to please use the mic, and to remind you the sessions are being recorded. And if you have any objection to that, please let us know. Then we will not record your session, or we will address it. Remove it subsequently. Fine. So may I invite Dr. Luciana Caenazzo from Padova, Italy, to talk to us on the role of ethics education for professionals involved in the identification of unknown corpses. Over to you.
Present my talk as with the title is just proposed by our chairman, and I organize my talk starting from a sort of definition of what I mean for that and identification of human remains, the ethical some ethical challenges related to human remains identification, and finally the role and the use that we can do with artificial intelligence regarding the process of identification. For the majority of the witnessed death, the process of victim identification and the subsequent death registration is a relatively simple and based on our own routine process. An example is when the death occurs in medical institution or is witnessed shortly after its occurrence by medical practitioners who have been involved in the treatment of the deceased. And in these circumstances, the identification and death certificate often pass as a relative unnoticed bureaucratic act. So, however, not all deaths occur under medical supervision and therefore cannot be recorded contemporaneously. In such cases, the examination, authoritative identification, registration, and subsequent funerary treatment of the deceased involve more complex procedures. And this requires the involvement of forensic doctors, practitioners, law enforcement, to determine various characteristics of the individual and the circumstances of death, which will in turn shape the direction of any ensuing investigation. But tracing the missing and identifying the dead are essential for upholding fundamental human rights and ensuring responsible humanitarian response efforts. Identification is necessary to reduce uncertainty and as part of the mourning process of relatives and friends, as coping or developing resilience, considering that a reverential treatment of bodies is part of this important socio-psychological process. Identification is necessary for registration, subsequent efforts governing the impact after the death, including funerary rites, property disbursement, criminal or civil court action, and possible economic compensation. So identification is a general process that can be of different heterogeneous practices, but in any case, 4 are the fundamental steps that are involved in the identification. The sample collection of human remains, documentation and storage of the remains that are found, the examination, and comparison with collected ante-mortem information on data from the presumed or possible family related to the unknown body. So thus, identification is not a simple or only an organizational or scientific achievement, but regardless of circumstances, it is also necessarily and always an activity with significant political and ethical relevance. One of the purposes of the investigation of human remains is to identify and return them to the families. But identification represents an important step in the rebuilding of societies, helping the return to normalcy for families and communities. So every effort should be made to identify as many human remains as possible to avoid increasing emotional suffering for family. The physical death of people does not immediately mark the end of their personal and social identity trajectories. The many ways in which we continue to interact with or invoke a past person and their material bodies continue to shape and answer to their post-mortem identities. Some person base an obligation on the feeling of the living, whether living family members would feel distressed at the abuse of bodies or members of cultures with the norms of respectful treatment. Others base the obligation on the interest that people have while alive in what happens to their body after they die. So in other words, we can say that personal attribute that transcends the individual during their lifetime and extend to their memory after death. The principle emphasizes the importance of treating every person, even in death, with dignity and respect, safeguarding their identity and legacy. The investigation of human remains has dual objective. So, recovering the first I want to say is that if we living people respect the wishes of the dead now, let the living people will respect our wishes after we die. And the investigation of human remains for identification has dual objectives. Recovering the examining remains for criminal investigation, which include establishing the cause and manner of death, but also identifying the remains to return them to the family. The last objective help family members by knowing the fate of their relative and allowing the remains to be handled in a culturally appropriate manner, thus enabling the family of the missing to mourn their loss. Since the next of the kin have a responsibility of giving the last rites and fulfilling the wish of the deceased, if the relatives are not able to do so, it may result in their protracted grief and thereby cause them harm. Collection, exportation, and analysis of human sample raise a host of ethical issues concerning the potential commodification and trafficking of human identity and the exploitation of community from which human remains are taken. During this kind of a general emergency, samples are frequently sent from a developing country to a highly resourced country for identification purposes. And now, just to give to you a number, current process of today of for identifying the deceased person are insufficient, and only 22% of the body are identified around the world. And this due in part to limited communication between origin and destination country and case stakeholders, which has hindered the full potential of advancement in identification technologies. New initiatives could address these gaps through interdisciplinary research and coordinated efforts of different kinds of meetings, training programs, and so to support the development and validation of international protocols and resources incorporating innovative methods. Artificial intelligence applications could contribute to enhancing human experts' performance, overcoming the subjective bias limitation to the traditional approach taken, for example, in forensic sciences. And the cognitive capabilities of human skill modeled using computational methods offer several new possibilities for forensic sciences, providing effective tools to reinforce the scientific method to improve the professional competencies of the forensic examiner and to provide an alternative opinion on a case. For instance, a recently proposed solution involved the digitization of human remains, enabling researchers to examine virtual replicas of human samples instead of physical remains themselves. It means acquiring images with varying device techniques and processing them on the basis of algorithms developed with machine learning techniques starting from large datasets. And these possibilities support low-income countries in identifying diseased individuals without requiring the transportation of biological material outside the country of origin. Once the identification results are received, this approach enables the remains to be managed in a culturally appropriate manner, thereby helping the family of the missing come to terms with their loss. And this is an example that I want to show to you. In the first part of the slide, we have the machine, the new form of machine based on artificial intelligence that recover post-mortem data that are compared with ante-mortem data, and they are able to, after the comparison, identify which is the body from which these remains come. And another is this possibility that we have always a machine that can be used based on artificial intelligence, and we can attribute some bones, skeletal remains to a person, or choice among a pool of persons and identify who is the right person that to which the remains belongs. But in this situation, we have to take in consideration what artificial intelligence is and what is the potentiality and what we have to be, what have to be done to work in an ethical condition. The first one is to provide a recommendation on the responsible use of artificial intelligence systems. Then to develop standards that ensure the breadth and quality of all data collected from unknown bodies, including personal effects, witness testimonies. Then design guidelines for construction of a cultural profile on the basis of the post-mortem data that can direct effort to identify potential families of the dead. Then we have developed sustainable programs of support for forensic capacity in low-income countries. Then we have another situation, foster knowledge exchange to connect the science and art and technology fields in order to develop approaches that use artificial intelligence and machine learning to enhance identification process and ante-mortem and post-mortem comparison. Act as a stakeholder platform in order to actively promote the identification of potential families of unknown and collection of ante-mortem data in the countries of origin. And last but not least, develop approaches that use social media to assess families of the missing. Managing the death and successfully identifying victims not only fulfills a state obligation but also addresses the humanitarian needs of victim families and affected communities. In this regard, it is essential to enhance preparedness by defining the most effective actions to be taken when such a situation arises, and to establish best practices for the recovery and examination of remains in order to determine the cause and manner of death, as well as to facilitate the identification and the return of the remains to the families. Considering these aspects, it is crucial that the professionals involved are properly trained to achieve these objectives, taking into account the importance of identifying unknown bodies, the potential offered by artificial intelligence, and the ethical implications associated with these processes. In this direction, an educational ethical view can help to reach the scope from top-down as well as bottom-up perspectives. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for that very informative presentation. I was just asking you a question from a different angle. When samples are remaining, what would be the process of enabling them to be used in research, like in terms of a biobank, and then a potential to connect them to future research?
This is an old question, so if we can use the sample that belong to that person for research. And in this was also, there is a document of ICEE, of the Red Cross, that saying that, okay, it was possible, but in my opinion, I was a little bit critics regarding this aspect, because, for example, I consider the possibility that you, for example, meet some incidental findings and how to manage incidental findings. For example, consider that we believe that these human remains belong to a family, and then we discover that the other daughter, the other son, do not belong to this family in this comparison. And this is with the objective to favorite this family. We go, I can say, we do not favorite the person that we discover that do not belong to this parenting. So this is not so simple. We have also the problem of consent. When we ask for the family, give me your biological sample for comparison, it's difficult to say, no, I need also the consent for research, because it's a very difficult moment for this family. And this is, I consider that is not so properly to ask this kind of aspect to the family. So at the beginning, I know very well the document of Red Cross, but I'm not so imperfect according with this. Thank you so much. Thank you for the questions.
I have another question. In your presentation, you twice brought up the broader significance of identification of bodies, and you spoke about the political and ethical relevance, and you also referred to the exploitation of communities. Could you explain that a little bit more?
Yes, this is an idea that moved also from when we started to speak about this with Vina Vasvani. So we have the idea that for reconstructing, for the resilience of the communities, is important that we identify this victim to give the opportunity to them to complete the process of rituals and whatever regarding this person. And so this is also, I have read in the literature, help to reconstruct the situation of the communities. So is otherwise there remain a sort of gap, a sort of unresolved situation that the communities bring with itself in the time. I don't know if I want to explain.
Yeah, and what about that issue of exploitation of communities? So in what sense are communities exploited if the remains are not properly identified?
Yeah, this is not related to a single death, but you consider, for example, in case of mass disaster, no? where you have a great number of and a great number of unknown person and that remain a sort of part unresolved inside. Not all. The point is that we have a lot of cadavers that are not identified in general, and you see you have only 22%. But in this case, when we have mass grave, mass disaster is important also for the exploitation of.
All of us in the audience will agree we really have the opportunity now to think more about this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. First of all, I want to express my sincere apologies for not being able to attend the conference in person. However, I'm sending my regards and greetings to all of you. During my presentation, I will try to assess ethics education as a function of ethics consultation. Personally, I consider ethics education in bioethics under three categories. The first one is ethics education in higher education, which is also called post-secondary education. For example, taking some ethics courses when pursuing an undergraduate degree or having a master's degree or PhD program in bioethics will be examples of this type. So, for example, you are in a medical school, nursing school, you are anyway taking some ethics courses, or after undergraduate degree, maybe you can pursue a master's degree directly in bioethics or a PhD, something like this. So this will be the first category, ethics education in higher education or in post-secondary education. The second category is vocational training programs for healthcare professionals. Since bioethics is a dynamic field, healthcare professionals' knowledge in ethics should be kept up to date through certain educational activities. So during education, of course, healthcare professionals may already have some kind of education, but when practicing their professions, also they should have some kind of continuous ethics education. And the third category indicates ethic education for patients and their families. So at that point, my presentation is related to the second and third categories. In the United States, the Joint Commission on Accreditation of Healthcare Organizations requires healthcare institutions to provide ethics services. At that point, ethics consultation in healthcare or in bioethics can be defined as an institutional effort dealing with ethical issues at the clinical level. In general, there are three forms of ethics consultation as individual consultants, consultation teams, and ethics committees. Based on their needs, healthcare institutions can decide on the type of ethic consultation. Of course, each form of ethic consultation has certain advantages and disadvantages. The individual consultant model indicates one consultant's or independent individual consultant's ethic consultation. Each consultant performs consultation independently. This type of ethics consultation can create effective and timely outcomes if each consultant possesses required qualifications like ethics knowledge, skills, and attitudes, which called core competencies. The second form is the consultation team model, which refers to more than one ethics consultants who work together as the team members. In comparison with the individual consultant model, the consultation team model can be more time-consuming, but each consultant can contribute to cases to create better outcomes because decisions are made through a team effort instead of individual opinions. The third form of ethics consultation is ethics committee model, which points out an interdisciplinary team that is consisted of individuals from several professionals, including physicians, nurses, social workers, clergies, and ethicists. In the United States, teaching hospitals and hospitals with at least 400 beds have this type of ethics consultation. The multidisciplinary aspect of this consultation model can provide the opportunity to benefit from each member's experience and contribution. However, this one is the most time-consuming consultation model. And also maybe some patients or family members cannot feel comfortable to express themselves in front of such a crowded group. According to the American Society for Bioethics and Humanities, ethics consultation has 5 goals. The first one is to identify and analyze ethical uncertainties or conflicts. The second goal is to facilitate the resolution of uncertainties and conflicts. The third goal of ethics consultation is to promote practices consistent with ethical norms and standards. The fourth goal is to help policy development, quality improvement, and resource utilization. And the final goal of ethics consultation is to provide ethics education. From this perspective, we can say that a primary goal of ethics consultation is ethics education. As a component of ethics consultation, the following groups should be provided with continuous ethics education programs. Firstly, ethics consultants and ethics committee members should continuously receive ethics education. Consultants and committee members may already have some ethical knowledge and skills. However, rapid medical, technological, social, and legal changes and developments require to revisit ethical issues and update all these people's knowledge in ethics. Secondly, healthcare professionals who work for the organization should get ethics education because raising ethical awareness and knowledge can significantly reduce ethical violations and contribute to the quality of healthcare services. And thirdly, patients and their family members should benefit from ethics programs. Such activities can help patients and their family members to have a better insight in ethical uncertainties, conflicts, and issues. The things so far I've mentioned are descriptive situations. However, we also need to look at the current situation to figure out the reality. A publication in 2021 demonstrates that in the United States, the percentage of ethicists or bioethicists performing ethics consultation is only 2%. Additionally, only 8% of individuals who carry out ethics consultation have a fellowship or a graduate degree in bioethics. These 2 points show that overwhelming majority of ethics consultants don't have any formal education in ethics. Moreover, another study finds that ethicists who perform ethics consultation have very limited impact because, firstly, ethicists mostly undertake the function of improving communication among relevant parties. Secondly, ethicists' recommendations and judgments mostly rely on physicians' medical expertise. And finally, ethicists' consultation doesn't significantly affect patients' decisions that are independent of physicians' authority. So here I have some recommendations about increasing the impact of ethics consultation and ethics education. The first 4 recommendations are related to organizational structure, and the last 4 recommendations are directly about ethics education. So, as the first recommendation, I can say that ethics consultation should be clearly defined and included in the organizational structure. So, the organization should accept the importance of ethics education or ethics consultation services. Secondly, ethics consultation should be considered a primary activity which is carried out by individuals who have formal education in bioethics. As a third recommendation, ethics consultation should be defined as a main activity that directly influences the quality of healthcare services. Fourthly, the role, position, and contribution of ethics consultation should be recognized, supported, and promoted by the leadership, the organization's leadership. In terms of ethics education, I can say that ethics consultation services should be provided by people who have formal education in bioethics, and also ethics consultants and ethics committee members who don't have any formal ethics education should be encouraged, even required, to earn a degree or at least a certificate in bioethics. Another recommendation, I can say that ethics consultants and ethics committee members should keep up with medical, technological, social, and legal changes and developments through continuous ethics educational activities. And finally, I can say that as a recommendation, certain ethics educational activity activities should be available also for patients and their family members. Thank you very much for your attention. Please let me know if you have any questions or if you want to contribute to the presentation through your opinions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ercan. I'm Renzo Pegoraro. The problem of education in clinical ethics consultation, we know is a big problem. But in your opinion, is better to involve more the people interested, especially physicians and other people interested in these topics, a kind of learning by doing, so concretely involve, or stress more a theoretical approach and to stress the background of the people that could be involved in ethics education, because I recognize the problem, and what is your opinion about that?
So normally, healthcare professionals, at least based on the experience in the United States, they should have certain ethics education before practicing their professions. So, in case of ethics education, when practicing their professions, the more than theoretical aspect, it should focus on the practice. Of course, it will be helpful also reminding them some theoretical aspects, but of course here the only goal, not like talking about moral theories or principles or standards. So these people are supposed to already have certain education when pursuing their schools. So vocational education mostly should focus on this healthcare professionals' needs, which daily base they are facing. So at that point, of course, more than the theoretical aspect, it should focus on the practical one. But here, each healthcare organization should design the content of ethics education based on their needs. If physicians, nurses, or other healthcare professionals working for the organization, if they have no ethics education previously, in this case, of course, there can be some kind of theoretical aspect. But if they already have some level of education during higher education, in this case, the continuous vocational education should be mostly based on the practical needs. And also based on, as I said, there can be certain medical changes, technology-based or legal changes-based differences. So in this case, the education mostly should address such stuff. But anyway, personally, I believe that in ethics consultation, ethics education, the most important function. Of course, for short period, consultation and case analysis also important, but in terms of long-term outcomes, I believe the most important function of ethics consultation is ethics education. So either theoretical, practical, but anyway, each ethics service, when design their work plan, they also think about ethics education for themselves, for other healthcare professionals, and for patients. patients and their family members.
Thank you for that. Is there any other question from the audience? If I may ask you a question, Dr. Ercan, this is Dr. Sunita. So it was interesting to hear about you speak also about the need for patient education, because that is often neglected, and that is sometimes done on a one-to-one, case-by-case basis when there's a discussion on a particular dilemma. Do you feel there's a need to reach out to like the larger population and looking at it in terms like health literacy, to look at health ethics literacy in that broader sense? What were your thoughts on that?
Do you mean large audience? Do you mean patients and their family members? Who do you mean?
What I mean is beyond the individual patient who may be there in front of us, on whom the ethics consultation is about. What I mean is there a need to reach out to the general population, like how we educate people on other things?
I mean, I see. So, of course, in a society, improving health literacy is important. And actually, it is a part of public health. But when we think about a hospital or any healthcare institution, I don't know how much it will be realistic, creating a goal like trying to reach out to all community. So the main part of plans or goals being realistic. So here I believe at that point we first should focus on our own committee members, our own healthcare professionals, and also people who comes to the organization, healthcare organization, to get services. But in a society, of course, reaching out to everyone, trying to increase health literacy is important, but more than ethics services, it is a little bit related to public health.
Thank you for that. Ercan, that was really wonderful. It really gave us insight into something which is very novel for us in India, to do ethics consultation with families and with communities. So my question is this the role of ethics committees, the hospital ethics committees? Are they that multidisciplinary team that you're talking about, or is it a separate team that comes together?
So, as I mentioned, there are different forms of ethics consultation, and ethics committee is just one of them. So, in United States right now, more than 65% of hospitals having consultation team model, and around 20% having, individual consultant model, and another around 20 or less than 20% have ethics committee model. So based on the size of the hospital, the function of the hospital, each may have a different type of ethics consultation. So in a place, maybe there is only one single consultant providing all the services, or there can be a few as consultant team, or as you mentioned, it may be a multidisciplinary ethics committee. So in my recommendation, I mentioned that the institution should accept ethics consultation as a primary function of the organization. So if you accept this, recognize this, and if you put in the organizational structure, then you can plan everything based on that. So if you have a consultation team, in this case, you can ask them to make certain plans and having certain goals about all the ethics education. So it is mostly about the type of ethics consultation and the the healthcare organizations' standpoint about how evaluating ethics services.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you from Angelika. I think thank you so much, Dr. Ercan, for that very thought-provoking session and very practical suggestions. I think that was very helpful. Thank you so much. Now we'll move on to the next session. So our next speaker, I'm very happy to introduce my colleague, Dr. Systla Rukmini from the Department of Psychiatry. She's a clinical psychologist, and she's going to be talking to us on ethics education in clinical psychology towards a positive ethics framework. Over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rukmini, and I'm a clinical psychologist working in the Department of Psychiatry here. My topic is ethics education in clinical psychology towards a positive ethics framework. So, I would like to start by saying that I think ethical behavior and ethical training is imperative for clinical psychologists. We regularly interact with a very vulnerable population who are in great distress, and we deal with sensitive issues of confidentiality or abuse. Therefore, ethics I think are relevant in all our roles, not only as clinicians but also as researchers and teachers. Ethics education is therefore often involved in all our in our entire training process and throughout our professional life as well. The regulatory body that governs us is the Rehabilitation Council of India. Although they have included ethics as a part of our syllabus, it does not mention any specific method or duration or the level of expertise that is to be reached in ethics. In practice, in our training centers, usually ethics is taught through either didactic lectures, through case discussions with supervisors, or through modeling. What I feel is that ethics education therefore does not always address the complex decision making that is involved in psychotherapy. Many nuances are missed by this method of ethics education. And therefore, I think a revision in the way in which we approach ethics education in clinical psychology is required. Also, I think currently ethics education focuses a lot on ensuring that people do not violate ethical boundaries. That means it focuses on wrongdoing, on prohibitions, on misconduct, and it focuses less on maybe positive or aspirational ethics. I think the positive ethics framework is a good model to understand how we can encourage people to do the best that they can do in a situation, rather than sticking only to the letter of the law or to following rigid rules or boundaries. So I think that therefore current ethics education is focusing too much on a possibility of wrongdoing and on prohibitions and misconduct that can be there, and those are covered as the bare minimum. However, positive ethics framework I think goes beyond that to understanding how behavior can be in the most ideal or the best manner possible. Positive ethics education I think aims to develop a sense of what a person can do rather than just what they should do. And this is possible in ideal situations if a person has developed innate ethical identity or ethical reasoning skills which are developed and throughout the process of training. In order to do this, we have to understand clinical psychology as having its own discrete culture and code of ethics. Anybody entering into this training process usually has to acquire and understand this culture slowly. Its values, its ethics, its ways of reasoning, communicating, the goals are maybe very different from what is normally considered good behavior or even ethical behavior in other settings. The acculturation theory I think comes into play here, where it suggests that acquiring ethics is a slow, gradual developmental process. Just as an immigrant entering into a culture would acquire the culture which they're entering into slowly and gradually, you learn ways of behaving, you learn the ways and customs of that place. Similarly, you can also acquire the ethics of clinical psychology by gradually understanding the ways in which this field and this experts in this field behave. So I think aspirational ethical behavior is made possible by combining what is positive ethics, that means focusing on what is the best that can be done in a situation, along with acculturation into this ethics and the culture of ethics in clinical psychology. So the aim of this paper is to review the current methodologies of ethics education in clinical psychology in India and to offer a set of practical recommendations by which ethics education can be more personalized and more nuanced, and also that it can be integrated with one's own personal values. The methodology that has been used is to review the current methods of ethics education, along with offering some recommendations based on this acculturation theory and the positive ethics framework and some of my own experience. The Indian framework for clinical psychology is provided by RCI, which is our regulatory body. However, as I said, it does not mention any methods for training in ethics. The Indian Association of Clinical Psychologists has given a code of conduct, but I think it has been developed in 1995, and it addresses very specific issues such as method of expert opinion, referrals, court testimony, and so on. It is heavily inspired by the American Psychological Association's code of ethics as well. However, many of those policies or principles are not culturally relevant here. In practice, when a trainee is going through clinical psychology training, case-based discussion is taking place, along with, of course, modeling. That means we see our seniors and consultants, and through their behavior, we learn ethical principles. However, I think case discussions with supervisors is somewhat limited in its purview, because you are exposed only to the certain cases that you are taking up for therapy, and you do not get the benefit of the perspective of other supervisors or other viewpoints from even your peers. And in supervision, many times supervisors can make the decision for trainees so that the process of decision making is not learned. And supervisors' own personal ethics can then influence the ethical principles that is imbibed by the trainees. In terms of implications, I think in this method of ethics education, there's a little difficulty in applying the principles which we learn in abstraction to real-world scenarios and dilemmas. This means that ethical behavior and ethical values can feel very removed from one's daily processes, and they may be seen as something only to be used in exceptional situations where there's an obvious ethical dilemma. I think developing innate ethical thinking or ethical identity can then be neglected. And obviously there's lack of guidance in professional life, which can leave people feeling very confused, and a lot of cognitive dissonance can occur when faced with ethical dilemmas. So due to this, I've thought of a few recommendations which are divided into 4 categories. The categories are: one is individual requirements for training, methods of pedagogy, systemic changes at the curriculum or institutional level, and the continued guidance of ethics during professional life. In terms of individual ethical development, the positive ethics framework, I think, aims to develop at least 2 things. One is virtues and the other is moral sensitivity. So virtues are ethical values or traits which can become part of one's own life during even non-professional experiences, such as respect or kind behavior or non-judgmental behavior, which are considered essential in our professional life, but can only be giving you sufficiently flexible approach to things if you have made it a part of your identity. So this means that a new dilemma will not throw you off, and you will not have to look at the ethical dilemmas and principles, but you will be able to approach it with sufficient flexibility. Moral sensitivity is to be able to see ethical nuances in a situation where the explicit ethical dilemma may not be present, and this increases the range of responses and perceived responsibility towards our patients and our outcomes. So the suggestion that I have for individual requirements are a few. One is, I would suggest that we engage in reflective writing. This has been found to be very useful in universities abroad, and I think it has a great benefit to each individual exploring their own internal ethical values and how does that is compatible with the ethics that has been taught in clinical psychology. Then there is values awareness. I think to increase awareness of one's own values or to increase awareness of one's own biases. There are methods like assessments or reflective writing again, or even discussion with supervisors which can take place. Specifically, some values may be especially challenging or shocking to the trainees through therapy, and I think self-reflection or discussion with supervisors would really help in kind of coming to terms or making a compromise or understanding where these ethics fits in with your personal values. Another suggestion by Handelsman is ethics autobiography. This is where a trainee would start writing their own viewpoint on ethics from the first day of training and then continue to keep track of it throughout training and maybe even in professional life. And this gives them a better understanding of how did they develop into the ethical practitioner that they are and what values are they basing them on. The last suggestion is ethics genogram, again given by Handelsman. It suggests that you map out the ethics of those you know personally. So this means that you are understanding what values they are basing their decisions on and what are the consequences of that. In clinical psychology especially, I think it is very important to emphasize self-care as part of ethics, not just as part of therapy and therapeutic process, but to understand what are the signs of burnout, to recognize one's own emotional biases and how to regulate your emotions. I think this will reduce the chances of personal crises or emotional moments clouding your professional judgment. It is also, I think, hopefully going to reduce the stigma surrounding burnout and allow people to provide support to each other, and I think that's an aspiration for the community as a whole. In terms of implications, I think it gives this kind of approach of our individual training would give us an opportunity to acknowledge that each person has their own biases and values comes from a diverse background into this profession, and how does that influence their take on ethics? This will mean that ethics are not just something that you're learning in classes or in lectures, but it's integrated into your own identity. That might avoid following these rules very rigidly or blindly when it's not required, or feeling very alienated from those ethics and maybe then ignoring them. However, we recognize that this will require more trained personnel, and it is also going to eat into the time that is present in an already hectic training schedule. I think another danger that we have to be careful about is that if this is not handled with neutrality and with a non-judgmental approach, the values that we are writing in terms of reflections or discussions with supervisors can become very authoritarian or very something that is imposed on the trainee rather than something that they evolve naturally. In terms of pedagogical methods, I think these are not new suggestions, but I was considering them as very important things that are not present right now in our training. One is case minutes-based discussion focused on ethics, to utilize ethical dilemmas which are presented to the training center, not to discuss one-on-one, but to discuss in a group. Use balanced groups. Balanced groups are basically a group discussion where there is no central authority, there are non-authoritative discussions, and there is guarantee of lack of censorship or judgment in this discussion. To have rounds which are also focused, inpatient rounds on ethical issues which are being presented from different cases, and to also engage in ethics debates as part of our academic programs. And this can also develop the theoretical understanding of ethics and review any current dilemmas that are present. The last is what we call values confrontations. This means that scenarios are presented to trainees and they're asked to make a decision about that scenario, and they'll have to defend their decision and understand what values is it based on. So I think the implications of this is that it expands the number of ethical issues to which trainees are regularly exposed. Rather than having only the ethical dilemmas which you see directly in therapy, you are exposed to a wide variety. It also gives the idea that ethical dilemmas are rarely very straightforward. There is no one right answer for any ethical dilemma. And I think it contrasts the ideal principles versus the real world practical difficulties that are encountered using case minutes and discussions. Again, this will of course be more time consuming and require more trained supervisors and teachers. And the supervisor's own knowledge has to be very sound to be able to engage in a very heated debate, maybe sometimes with trainees. At the systemic level, I think what I would like to suggest is that one, as a whole, the organization has to give priority to ethics in their culture. That means in written documents and perhaps the attitude of various high-level management, and also in terms of the orientation for new people who join the organization. I think priority should also be given to ethics in our curriculum, which is currently only mentioned as one chapter in one of the papers. But there's not much mention of how much time should be dedicated to it, any scientific writing or programs regarding that. This is a suggestion that I have, that perhaps ethical debates, I think the paper by Dr. Ercan actually mentions this, is that you have a neutral time or place where ethical issues can be discussed. Usually we have research-related consultations about whether something is ethical or not, but clinical issues are very rarely discussed in neutrality. And I think an ethics advisor, that is an appointment of a person who is an ethics expert who can provide a neutral voice in many ethical debates in clinical issues specifically, would help. In terms of curriculum changes, I think there are a lot of ethical decision-making frameworks and algorithms about how you can make clinical decisions in an ethical manner. And at least in theory, it's useful to know. Whether it is relevant to various scenarios, of course, can be incorporated in case discussions. Also, understanding where are the current historical origins of confidentiality or not having a dual relationship with the patient. Why are these things considered important should be taught. I think sociological issues which will throw light on the complexity of human behavior. Many times we are seeing clients coming from various backgrounds, and I think understanding the role of poverty or the role of family, the role of different cultural backgrounds, norms and taboos which are different from place to place would help. It will help us to understand the diversity of the client population that we see in terms of gender, sexual orientation, value systems, etc. As well as the positive ethics in theory, at least I think, can be understood, so that we have a discussion on how we can enhance one's own effectiveness. The implications, I would say, are that obviously this requires a lot of changes at a very high level, and many stakeholders are involved, and no one voice can make that change. So it involves many other people and much more maybe power in some sense. There's also training that will be required for trainers. There also may be a debate about which value systems should be taught, what should be emphasized, what should not be emphasized. And I think although we would like to have more scientific-based programs on ethics, there is a scarcity of such programs in India especially. In terms of continued guidance on ethics in professional life, my suggestions are that ethical principles or practices should be periodically reinforced, just as we would mandatory have continued medical education or continued rehabilitation education for clinical psychologists. There should also be some points given for ethics-related scientific work. I think ethical dilemmas which are experienced by clinicians are very unique, very individualized and nuanced, and if we can create a database of these dilemmas and how that was navigated, it would really be helpful to others as well. Of course, keeping in mind confidentiality. Perhaps an ethics board can also be created where independent clinicians can do consultations. I think like I said, Dr. Ercan was suggesting that. I think an ethical peer support group would also be helpful, where again there is no authority who is suggesting what is right or wrong and there is no judgment involved. Would really help. In terms of scientific work, there is no present journal that I would find, at least if somebody knows that, please let me know, on clinical psychology related ethics specifically. And I think the ICEE and the CPSI are organizations where clinical psychologists are involved should develop more updated guidelines for ethics as well. In conclusion, I would say that ethical behavior is becoming increasingly relevant in our society because there are so many opportunities where clinical psychologists are involved in many fields now. However, our current methods of ethics do not always lead to the most ideal ethical behavior. I think a positive ethics approach and the acculturation theory suggest a way forward of what methodologies can be developed for training and at systemic levels as well. It will enable clinical psychologists, I think, to develop a strong ethical identity. And the goal is to soar beyond necessary rules and regulations to actualizing the values of our profession. These are my references. I would just like to conclude with this quote, I think that I found very relevant. It says, ethics is a study of right and wrong, but is often taught as a study of the wrong. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you. Are there questions? I always have questions. You present a few very interesting ideas. At the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned the American recommendations, and then you seem to say that these are not entirely applicable to the Indian context. But the model that you presented, to me, it seemed like a kind of a universal model, because you offered the recommendations that you offered for training and ethics implementation in practice. I think we would be able to implement these in the United States as well. So where does that cultural specificity come into your model?
Sorry. When I was talking about the cultural specificity, I was actually just referring to that fact that the code of ethics which has been provided by them, which is mentioning what ethical behavior is correct in which situation, sometimes is not applicable in India. But I think the training part of it is, I'm not saying is very culturally specific. I think the ideas about training, I suppose, are universal. But some specific things like should we accept gifts from clients? Should we allow personal touch? Should we allow them to talk? Should we allow their family to be involved in treatment? To what extent they should be involved? I think those are very culturally specific, and normally we are taking decisions based on this particular case and their individual symptoms or individual concerns, and we have to make that decision based on our own ethics knowledge, really. But I think there is not sufficient training given in that area, and maybe we might make a misstep and violate certain ethics without realizing it. Yes?
Just to, my big challenge has been, now that you mentioned it, people have always fought me on the fact that it doesn't matter about the context. And as a clinician for 32 years, I think the inequities, the inequalities, and the socio-cultural differences which exist in a country like India are the context which has to be taken into consideration when taking ethical decisions. And that's why I would tend to agree that you cannot have, for example, I used to always propagate that in India, I think justice is very important as compared to autonomy. And for me, autonomy used to not be the individual, but used to be the family. But the more I think about it in the last 30 years, it was not really the family members, but it was the inequities and inequalities,
socio-economic predominantly, which decide that the family has to be involved. Because today when I take a decision on a newborn getting, preterm baby getting 3 weeks or 3 months of therapy in an NICU, paid for by the husband's side, by the wife's side, a mother's side, and not by the husband. But the decision taken by the husband's side, meaning nothing comes out of that person's pocket. Because culturally the baby is looked after for the first 3 months by the family, by the woman's family, because the baby delivers in that. So there are cultural differences, though I tend to agree that in principle it's all equal. The ethical principles are the same, but how I apply it here has to change, because I cannot do what the Americans do ethically, because my ethics would be slightly different. But every time I've said that, I've been attacked by ethicists saying, no, it doesn't matter. You've got to respect the person. I'm not disrespecting that person by taking the person who's paying for the bill in my situation into concern. So I just wanted to bring up that argument again.
Thank you.
So I now invite our last speaker. Very happy to welcome you, Dr. Sarikasri Surendrakumar, Chennai, with a very interesting topic of assessing final year medical students' preparedness for Entrustable Professional Activities, that's EPAs, for qualitative study. Over to you.
Very good afternoon to everyone present here, respected chairs and co-chairs and all the audience. I am Sarikasri Surendrakumar, an intern from Padova Medical College Hospital and Research Institute, Chennai. And my topic today is assessing final year medical students' preparedness towards entrustable professional activities via a qualitative study. So we have all been here. We are just traveling the road, following Google Maps, and we are confidently traveling, following the blue line. And suddenly the road stops. Google Maps says go straight, but straight is nothing. It's just a hollow end. But Google Maps is saying that your destination is on the other side. And you're just wondering, what are we supposed to do now? Are we supposed to jump? Are we supposed to fly? Sometimes we do it. Sometimes we do try to jump, sometimes we do try to fly. Those are not the ideal methods, but sometimes it does work. But the other times, we are just hanging between theory and clinical practice. We are just hanging between two cliffs, and most of the times we fall down hard. And that's why EPAs are essential. So entrustable professional activities is like the construction crew that comes in and says, don't worry, we will build a bridge between the two cliffs, and we will build it step by step, safely, so that you won't fall. We will make sure that we will test the bridge, and we will make sure that it supports your weight till you can confidently walk with your own 2 feet. So what are these entrustable professional activities? So entrustable professional activities are core clinical tasks that graduating medical students must be able to perform independently and reliably. So they can range from patient assessment, diagnosis, communication with the patients, and management of diseases. So these entrustable professional activities provide a structured transition from academic learning to clinical practice. So what does this entrustment actually mean? Entrustment means that the supervisor trusts a learner to independently perform these tasks in real-world clinical settings. But here's the catch. Unfortunately, medical students are not ready for this. They are not ready to undertake these responsibilities, and this remains a critical concern. Particularly when we talk about confidence and the readiness to perform skills or activities independently, that's where we lack. So there is a need for assessing medical students' preparedness towards entrustable professional activities, and that's what my study is about. We had very simple objectives, very simple but very critical objectives. First is explore. Explore the perceptions of students regarding preparedness to engage with entrustable professional activities. The second is understand. Understand the students' confidence in their clinical skills. conducted a study in Panimala Medical College with 24 final year medical students using purposive sampling, and we collected the data using semi-structured interviews and focus group discussions, and these data was audio recorded, transcribed, open coding was done, and thematic analysis was done. Ethical approval was priorly obtained from the IHEC of PMC at Chennai, and the written informed consent was obtained from all the participants. The data collection was anonymous, and we made sure all the data was confidential and was used only for research purposes. So these are the results. First, coming to the demographics. There was a female preponderance, with 67% of the participants were females and 33% were males out of the 24 total participants. And our thematic analysis showed 7 important themes. First is limited awareness of entrustable professional activities. Our participants were not aware what entrustable professional activities were and what it meant for their education. Participants who knew about entrustable professional activities were uncertain about what these activities expected out of them. They felt that there was lack of EPA integration in their curriculum. And students felt that there was confidence gap in intern readiness, and they feared clinical responsibilities. What the students told was, I was able to write how to manage a case of myocardial infarction in my exams, but when I was in the clinics, I could not do anything. I was stuck. I froze. Then is theory practice gap, again the same. And then students felt that there should be inclusion and training for EPAs in their curriculum. Next is our discussion and conclusion. Students reported that they had little to no prior knowledge about entrustable professional activities, and the absence of entrustable professional activities training leaves students underprepared for their clinical education. So there is more practical experience with EPAs is necessary. So students feel less confident in their ability to perform key clinical tasks, and they were anxious about patient safety. They were not sure if they will be able to manage the patients, and they were afraid, what if something happens to the patient? What will I do then? So they were anxious about clinical decision making and managing workload. So what does it mean? It means that custom training programs are needed for EPA mastery. Current assessments do not fully prepare students for EPA execution. What we have to understand here is theoretical knowledge is not equal to what is done in clinics. And students need more guidance in developing confidence with entrustable professional activities. So targeted interventions are necessary to link entrustable professional activities with practical application. So we have to understand here that entrustable professional activities are not just checklists. This is a structured approach so that students can transition from theory to practice in a very effective way. So what we did was we designed and developed a module on EPA. My colleagues here will be distributing the module so you can go through this module. So this module is called Let's Prepare, which is promote entrustable professional activities in responsible engagement. So this module has everything from start to the end. So this is a module to sensitize undergraduate medical students about entrustable professional activities. Why undergraduate medical students? Because we feel that early intervention will make sure that students are ready for clinical practice. So we validated the module, phase validity was done, content validity was done, and reliability assessment was done, and the module was created. So what's next? What are we planning to do next? We are planning to implement the module as a pilot test first. Then we are going to evaluate the module and update the module based on the feedback that we receive from the participants. And then we will go and implement it in a larger level, and we will target more students and more institutions. And then we will focus on continuous quality improvement. So these are my references. Thank you.
In order to get us started with the question, I have a methodological question. Why did you have many more females than males in your sample? It was almost 1/3 versus 2/3.
It's basically the class composition that we have. We have a 2:1 composition, so females are more predominant in our class than males. So we have about 92 females and 56 males.
And why did you have, what was it, 26 or 27?
24 participants.
Yeah, why did you have that number?
So it was, we tried to focus on participants and who were willing. So 24 participants were willing, and we made sure that the teams were saturated so that no more participants were needed. So we made sure that the teams were repeating, and in the interviews the teams were repeating and the teams were saturated. So 24 participants was more than enough for our interviews.
Alright, so basically you went on sampling until...
It was purposive sampling, yes.
You ran out of participants, but at that moment you also felt that you had reached theoretical saturation.
Sorry, can you repeat?
So basically you kept on recruiting until you ran out of participants, but when you ran out of participants at that time you also felt that you had reached theoretical saturation.
No, we went on recruiting until we felt that the semantic analysis was saturated.
A lot of the training that goes on for the undergraduates now is prescriptive. They have this logbook, they have a list of competencies that they need to observe or perform independently, or all those gradings are there. And because of that, they'll just finish up that, they'll just attain what they need to attain, and they will proceed to the next. So in that way, they're not really involved in the decision making, in the actual clinical aspect of what goes on in the hospital. So do you think involving them, at least in the rounds discussions or in the daily observation of what actually goes on in the hospital, will help them to perform these EPAs rather than just giving them this checklist of things?
So EPAs is not just a checklist of things.
No, I'm not saying the EPAs are a checklist, but what's going on now is a checklist, that they have a certain number of 9, 10 competencies in a certain topic that they have to observe and then perform under supervision and then perform independently. So rather than having this sort of minimum 3 in this, minimum 2 in this, just allow them to be there in the hospital and see what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. Will that help them in any way?
Yes, so what our plan is that to integrate EPAs in their ward rounds, in their lectures and in ethics classes. So, but then our module also consists of 13 core clinical skills from the Association of American Medical Colleges. It's something that cannot be missed out. So we can integrate it in both clinics and in theoretical theories, so that students do not have a gap between theory and practice, and they can smoothly transition from their theoretical knowledge to their clinical practice in their internship.
That was very interesting. I have one question, because I know that it was, I think the analysis was all anonymized and things like that, am I right? So do you think there's any association, do you have their attendance, the theory and clinical attendance, does that impact on their confidence level?
Well, not in our institution with our sample size and the sample population, because we have a very strict attendance policy, so our theory and attendance is on theoretical attendance and the practical attendance is almost the same. So the attendance has no role in the study that we have conducted now.
Yeah, I think we've had a few very interesting lectures. We've heard about the role of ethics in the identification of unknown remains. We've heard about the role of ethics consultation and how ethics consultants actually need ethics education themselves in order to contribute to ethics education. We also heard about the role of ethics education in clinical psychology and how we can better prepare medical students for their future profession. So I think all these presentations have important implications for healthcare ethics education, and that's, I think, what we're all here for.
Thank you, and I think with that we close. So thank you very much for all the participants for joining us, and the speakers for being with us, and thank you to you, Dr. Joris.